October has become the bloodiest month in Iraq in 5 years. Data from the country's Interior, Defense and Health ministries puts the death toll at 964 people. That's almost 90% of civilians, 855. According to the government, that number hasn't been this high since April 2008, when more than 1,000 were killed. Well, the numbers don't quite correspond with the findings of the UN, which puts July as the bloodiest this year. But whatever the figures, it's clear the country's facing an increasing security problem. No surprise, then, that the Iraqi Prime Minister is in Washington, D.C., asking for help. RT's Ganesh Chikan reports.
We know that the Iraqi leadership has made a request for U.S. assistance in the fight against terror. We don't know the details of that request. The leaders wouldn't elaborate on that. The Iraqi Prime Minister called al-Qaeda a scourge for Iraq and the Middle East. The Iraqi Prime Minister has arrived in Washington in the month that turned out to be the deadliest in the last 5 years. For those who are following the news, it's becoming such a repetitive phrase, the deadliest month in Iraq for this many years. Sadly, we hear it all the time. The fact is that following the U.S. invasion in 2003, terrorism has skyrocketed in Iraq. The sectarian war that broke out as a result of the invasion has created a great environment for terrorists. The Iraqi Prime Minister says it's getting worse because he says as a result of the so-called Arab revolutions, there is a power vacuum in the region which extremist forces take advantage of. He specifically spoke about Syria and the situation there. Of course, even though Iraq's Nouri al-Maliki knows what the U.S. invasion has led to in his country, he can't be too critical of Washington because, after all, in a way, it's thanks to the U.S. that he's now in power.
Well, political analyst Juan Zulal says the level of violence has recently spiked across the entire Middle East.
The Prime Minister of Iraq, when he made that call, I think what he means by it is providing intelligence, arms and support, because he fears that the spillover from Syria is affecting the level of violence in Iraq, and the level of violence in Iraq as a whole has increased because of that. But the reality is the politics of Iraq is broken, and the violence is a result of that. It's not only because the Iraqi army is weak, it's just because the Iraqi politics as a whole is dysfunctional and hasn't worked for the last 10 years. So I don't think what's going on in Iraq is going to be a risk to, and a global sort of risk as such, but obviously it's going to be a risk to oil markets around the world. It's going to be a risk to the region, as the Middle East, Iran, and what's going on in Syria. I mean, this could turn can snowball from Syria and then to Iraq, and then it can. You never know where it's going to stop.
Let's now get some further analysis from Haifa Zangana. She's a Kurdish Iraqi novelist and former prisoner of Saddam Hussein's regime. She's also contributed to The Guardian newspaper. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess you must have been, first of all, greatly relieved back in 2003 when the intervention began and U.S. forces effectively won your freedom.
Yes. Can you repeat the question, please? I can't hear you very well.
Were you relieved back in 2003 when the invasion began and the U.S. forces effectively won your freedom?
Oh, not at all, no. It's, I mean, we understood from the beginning, many Iraqis did that, including myself, that this is not really liberation as it's being claimed. This is invasion, and there is a difference between opposing Saddam's regime and the occupying of your own country.
So 10 years on, what's your assessment of the security situation right now?
Well, it's absolutely terrible because it is affecting daily life from morning until night and every single hour of the day. People are feeling unsafe to do anything. Whoever goes out, they don't know, I mean, doesn't know whether they come back safely or not. The distrust of the regime and terrorist attacks mostly targeting innocent people rather than other forces. So it's a huge decline in the security and the feeling of unsafety driving people mad on a human level.
That's right. These latest figures put the 90% of the casualties as civilian casualties. The Prime Minister has asked the U.S. for help. What could he mean by that? What kind of help? A second intervention?
Well, it's asking for more to be supplied by more weapons, by more advanced technology in order to what he calls to fight Al-Qaeda. But what he is not mentioning really is it's not just Al-Qaeda which is active in Iraq. Terrorist acts is part and parcel of the regime itself. There are about 6 other organizations or militias which they are attached to the political process, and the regime itself are acting in very violent way against Iraqi civilians. There are Al-Mahdi army militia, there is Badr brigade, there is Asa'ib al-Haq, and I can go on and continue counting many others. So asking for extra weapons is in fact adding to the crimes of the US since the occupation in 2003 committed against Iraqi people. Until now, the weapons available for the regime, Maliki regime, has been used in a big way against the civilians themselves when they are demonstrating, when they are in vigils, and we've seen that clearly in April in Huwayja, north of Baghdad, where there was a vigil camp and it was attacked by the security forces and 51 people were killed. They were demonstrators and many others, like 3 times that figure, were wounded. And as we know in Iraq, because of the lack of health service, many of the wounded are usually will end up dead.
Aside from lack of weapons, as you say, or at least the Prime Minister will claim, why can't the government cope with this on its own?
Well, the government does not represent the people. I mean, the government is quite busy squabbling among the alliance. It's formed of alliance of some political parties. Most of them got militias, and they are very busy fighting each other. So this interfighting is causing a lot of the horrendous violence against the civilians. It's not the lack of weapons that is, it's the trust of the people, it's the real intention and the work of the regime itself and the many political parties there in order to ensure the security of the people. The only safeguard for any government in the world to reduce terrorism, whatever it is to build up the trust with their own people. And the Maliki regime, with all its militias, they failed tremendously in that aspect.
Haifa Zargana, Kurdish Iraqi novelist and former prisoner of Saddam Hussein's regime, live with us on the line from London. Thank you very much for your time.